Okay, hi, my name is Mary Yusevich, and I'm pleased to talk to you today about Ask Me Anything. And I want to welcome you to NEWIE's latest Ask Me Anything. As I said, my name is Mary Yusevich. I've been on the board of NEWIE for the last 13 years. I was one of the original board members. And I'm so honored about today's Ask Me Anything and the conversation we have with Jackie Birdsall. Ask Me Anything is a series that NEWIE has offered. It has conversations with credible leaders in the energy and environmental field. AMA events occur regularly on the second Wednesday of the month, so please mark your calendar so that you can join us for these exciting opportunities. If you are not a member of NEWIE, I strongly suggest that you go to our website, NEWIE, which is NEWIE.org, and become a member today so you can get the newsletters and the event calendars and also all the great social channels for future speakers announcement. I'd like to now, on behalf of everyone, give a big, huge thank you to our sponsors. Without our sponsors, we wouldn't be here today. So I want to recognize Eversource, First Light, Mass Clean Energy, National Grid, Robinson & Co., Synapse, and we are thankful for them sponsoring this particular event. Now, if you have a question for Jackie, I strongly urge you to go down at the bottom of your screen. You'll see Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat, but into the Q&A section of the call, of the bottom screen. And we're going to try to get to everyone's questions. And if I don't, I apologize, but we will try to answer them as a follow-up. But I think we can do that because I usually start off right away with the questions that you submit. So please submit questions, and many of them. Now we have an exciting event happening up in Maine. If you've been in your house like I have with Zoom and you really want to go out and connect, reemerge, you have a reception happening on September 23rd with our main chapter, our NEWIE main chapter. And Price Atwood is the sponsor for this. And we strongly suggest that you get out and meet your other Mainers. Anybody from Massachusetts who wants to cross the border can go as well. And finally, an upcoming event. How do we want to, who are we going to be talking to next? Priscilla Randall is coming on Ask Me Anything. She's Director of Federal State Government Affairs for Vistra. Vistra is the leading generator in New England, power generator. We have a lot of questions for Priscilla. What does the future of the grid and generation look like? She's going to give us real insight to how we're going to reduce our carbon footprint. I strongly suggest that you register for that event as quickly as possible. And now I'd like to welcome my guest, Jackie Birdsall. Jackie, it's a pleasure having you on today's Ask Me Anything. And we love these series. It's a great opportunity for not only for me to meet women like yourself, leaders in this industry, but have an opportunity to exchange and talk about the key issues. We're going a little out of our comfort zone here because we're actually going to talk about transportation. And from what I can read about your bio, Jackie, you're a car girl. Your whole life has been in the car world. So you started off at General Motors Institute and got your degrees, and then what, did you go right into Toyota, or did there some other car companies before you got to Toyota?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Mary, for having me for this opportunity. I'm really excited to meet more fantastic women on the opposite coast from me, but I do love any chance I have to visit New England, so I really appreciate this opportunity. And yeah, you're right. Ever since pretty much I was 16, I was kind of obsessed with automotive. And I'm actually Pet Boy, this automotive chain. I don't know if they have it on your coast, but
we have Pet Boy, we have Jacquelyn, we have them. So that's where you got your hands really dirty in the world of cars.
That's right. That's right. So it actually started even before university. But yeah, I first learned of fuel cells in 2008. I got involved in this industry And that was really my first awakening to the negative impacts of transportation on the environment. And so that became my focus, was to work on zero emission vehicles, hydrogen and fuel cells. So that's been 18 years now for me. To your question directly, only actually 9 with Toyota. So when I first graduated from university, I started working with a nonprofit called a partnership that represented many different automakers, including Toyota. And then from there, I decided to go directly as an automaker on their.
So you went right into the world of the car, but you went into a specific area of the car industry, which is how can we make cars cleaner? Because last statistic I saw, 60% of the carbon problems that we have with climate change stems from the car industry. So that's a big polluter.
It is. And actually, you know, back again in 2003, when this first came into my awareness, we weren't even talking about climate change yet. The discussion on the table was petroleum dependency, all of the clear negative impacts of refining oil, of going and drilling for oil, oil spills, local air quality. We hadn't really started to register the emergency that is climate change now. So I would say that, at the time it was about human health, environmental health, and now it's really to a point of crisis.
So, yeah, and that brings me to one of our questions that we have. So you're with Toyota, but you've never really worked in Japan with Toyota. It's all been stateside, right?
No, actually, so I was on the program, the engineering team that launched both the first and the second generation Toyota Mirai. And Mirai is our production fuel cell electric vehicle. Unfortunately, it's not for sale in New England just yet. We do have some stations in the ground, but some regulatory hurdles to clear there. But after launching the first generation vehicle, I went to for the headquarters in Japan on the second generation Mirai, which we launched just earlier this year.
So you lived in Japan for how many years then?
I was just there for 13 months.
13 months.
Yeah.
And what was the biggest difference between Japan and here? Because I love to ask questions on the personal as well as on the industry and issues. So what would you say was the biggest difference, particularly maybe from a woman's perspective in Japan? So is it really very male dominated there?
It was. It was definitely less diverse, both from a racial and a sex standpoint. So I was the only female and almost always the only white person. So that really didn't matter, right? My colleagues really accepted me as a counterpart. I think one of the beauties of being an engineer is that the engineering language transcends English and Japanese, right? Because numbers are numbers, schematic or schematic, graph, everything. So I can still really effectively communicate what needed to be communicated because of the engineering language being global, right? So it was really a great experience, and I highly recommend if you get the chance to go work for the company in another country, absolutely do so.
Well, and because also you've been a big advocate for STEM, and I think that's an important thing for any of the young women that are on the call today, and young men, is that you said a really important thing is that the world of engineering is its language in itself. So you can really, have an opportunity to have cross-language barriers without having not know the language, because engineering, its own language. So you don't need to know Japanese. You don't need to know German. It's the universal language when you're an engineer. So there's another reason why we should get more women into the STEM world.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting because I've been reading a lot of articles about Toyota. And can you kind of address this comment that I've seen that Toyota is not joining in the world of seeing the importance of electric vehicles? Because I think there's a real distinction at Toyota between electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles and all the story behind that. And I was wondering if you could set the record straight today about Toyota's position on going to alternative fuels, and and to get to a cleaner environment?
Yeah, so that's an interesting and unfortunately pretty common misconception that that we are, for some reason, not all on board with battery electric vehicles. When I think, because we talk often about our electrification strategies. So, actually, when we began the development of the Mirai, our fuel cell electric vehicle, that was over 25 years ago. That's the same time we began development of the Prius. And so we saw 25 years ago in research and development this parallel path of all of these different electrification options that we offer our customers. So this is something that we've been building on for. So in 2015, we launched what we called Environmental Challenge 2050, and that challenge includes these 6 different aspects of things we need to do to reduce our impact on the planet. One of those is reducing our carbon emissions related to our vehicle fleet specifically by 90% in 2050 compared to our 2020. The only way to get there is through electrification. But when we say electrification, what we mean is plug-in hybrids, electric, and fuel cell electric, and that it will take all of those to get us to these decarbonization goals. So at no point are we saying no battery electric vehicles. We're just saying that we need to give different options to the customers and let them choose what best into their lifestyle. So, the battery electrics, we've recently announced some movements that we're making in the battery electric space, but what we're seeing right now is that the plug-in hybrids are serving as a bridge to get us battery electric, where we can have batteries that are optimally sized for the actual daily driving that people do, right? Like the average American drives 30 miles a day. So why would we make a vehicle with a battery for 300 miles a day when that's really not necessary? They can use a 30-mile battery, plug that in, right? 30 or 40 miles, plug that in, and then still get to zero emission driving. And then that way, we also don't have to worry about the material of that battery, right? And then likewise, if we have customers that want to drive fully zero emission vehicles, but have a longer range, that's where the Mirai comes in. So the Mirai, instead of plugging it in, we refill it with hydrogen, takes 5 minutes. Second generation Mirai gets 402 miles on a fill. So really that's what bridges the gap for our customers that are used to driving conventional vehicles, need that quick refilling time, that long range, but also want a fully electric vehicle. So by no means are we against battery electric vehicles. We're actually 100% on board with the recent announcement. We heard this claim towards 2035, 50% of all electrified vehicles. We're ready to go with that. And battery electric vehicles are a critical part of that portfolio.
So I've heard that the world of transportation, correct me wrong, that part of it is you're dividing it up. So what, if I could repeat what you're saying, is that there's a need for electric vehicles for a certain type of vehicle, but there could be a real need for hydrogen or fuel cells because the horsepower you need for trucks and trains and marine and airplanes, it can't be done on lithium batteries. That's where then hydrogen plays a critical role because it provides that clean energy, and that's where the division is going to be divided up in the transportation world. Is that a fair assessment, or have I gotten that, can you provide some light into that?
Yeah, so I think the first point is that the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is an all-electric vehicle. And I think that is something a lot of people might also have a misperception about. We're not burning the hydrogen. We're combining it with oxygen in an electrochemical reaction that creates water. And a byproduct of that reaction is the electricity that powers the vehicle. So it's an electric motor. It's an electric vehicle, but just instead of getting the electricity from the battery, we're getting it from the fuel cell itself. The difference between the two is that, you said the power, right? You hit that critical piece. The power and the energy are decoupled in the fuel cell, and we actually get to store the energy in a fuel cell vehicle in the hydrogen, whereas in a battery electric, you store the energy in the battery along with the power, right? So to your point, we can get enough power for these larger vehicles for larger horsepower requirements, right? From either battery or for fuel cell, but where we get hit is with how much energy we can store on board. Because with batteries, typically, or as far as research has gotten us with batteries, which is phenomenal. Hydrogen still has a better energy by gravimetric. So the gravimetric energy density is higher for hydrogen than it is for batteries, which just means by weight, we get more energy in hydrogen. So if we have these larger vehicles and we need more energy to move them, it makes more sense to store that energy as hydrogen than it does in a battery. So it depends on the application, right? But to your point, yeah, batteries may be more well suited typically for smaller vehicles for lower range, while hydrogen and fuel cell is better for longer range and larger applications. Now that said, when we talk about the customer level, like specifically light duty, what our forte is, right? It comes down to just the customer use. What do the customers want to do? Some of our customers may never want to go to a gas station again, right? They're going to want to plug in at home. They're doing, it's easy. They can come home, they can plug in. It's not a problem. Some of our customers just don't have that option or prefer to go to a station and take 5 minutes to refill instead of half an hour or a couple hours to recharge. It's not up to us to make that decision. It's up to us to make both options available to our customers so that we're not leaving anyone behind when people want to switch to zero emission transportation. And so that's why both of these technologies are really necessary to get us towards a fully zero emission future.
So this is really interesting because hydrogen's been around forever. Why all of a sudden are we hearing more about hydrogen? And this vision that Toyota has for the transportation world, is it something we're going to see in the next 5 years, or is it something very futuristic like the Jetsons that we're going to see come 2050 when some of us might no longer be even driving, including myself?
Well, it's already on the ground. So again, we launched the first gen in 2015, second generation was 2021. So I can understand how people not in California, it can seem like this futuristic thing, right? But here it's on the ground. Here we have the Mirai running around. We have heavy duty trucks as well. We've taken that same Mirai fuel cell system. We've taken 2 of them. We've put them into a Class 8 semi. We've demonstrated we can pull 80,000 pounds of goods using the same hydrogen fuel cell system that's in our light duty passenger vehicles. And that project's really cool because it's doing what's called a drayage operation in the ports. And by the way, Port of Long Beach, Port of LA, these ports are the busiest ports in the United States. That's where most of our goods comes in. And these diesel trucks typically drive into the port. They pick up the container from the marine vessel. They drive it up to the rail yard where it then gets shipped all around the US, right? There's 16,000 diesel trucks that do this every day. So if you can imagine the impact of just local air quality, just looking at local air quality, the health of the communities that live around these ports are all severely impacted, right? If we can replace all these diesel semi trucks with hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks, it has just this phenomenal impact, right? So we started this demonstration of 10 of these trucks already on the road here in the ports, which again, you would see only in California, unfortunately, at this time. But it is something that is real now, that we are collecting real world data. The Mirai you can sell or you can buy. So we have customers who have purchased this vehicle and intend to keep it, for its lifetime. So it's a real thing that is already on the ground. To your point, hydrogen has been around for, at least 50 plus years as an industrial commodity in the US. So it is not this kind of foreign concept. It's something that's very real in that we have a great experience with already. So I think it's just getting to a point now where people are starting to realize how critical of a moment we're in, where there's this intersection now of environmentalism with humanitarianism, where human health is really starting to be recognized as being impacted by what we're doing to the environment. And so we're starting to see more people paying attention to what type of solutions are necessary to this problem, where previously it was just seen as an issue for the environment. Now people are recognizing this has a real impact on human life.
We do have a question for you. Off-roading, heavy-duty vehicles. I know you talked about one generation of a vehicle that is using hydrogen. Is Toyota have any plans for the off-duty, off-road, heavy-duty vehicles to go hydrogen?
I cannot speak to any plans other than what we have already announced, unfortunately. But as you already touched on, hydrogen can provide the power for just about anything. And what we've actually done with the fuel cell system that we have in the second generation Mirai is we've repackaged it into a power module where you can effectively replace any gasoline or diesel engine with the fuel cell stack and switch whatever that powertrain is over to zero emissions. So it's definitely not off the table. There's no technical reasons why it's not possible.
Another question coming in. So Toyota is a big company, and why is Toyota, what are you guys doing to get this be more, instead of just out in California, more involved in our national plans? Are you in Washington? Are you working with the Biden administration? How much influence are you pushing to get us off of this terrible fossil fuel and onto a cleaner energy?
Yeah, it's all about education, right? So we definitely reach out to educate regulators, legislators, whenever they're looking to make any laws and want to understand what technologies Toyota is prepared to offer. We're more than welcome, we welcome them with open doors to come and see the work that we're doing to get in the vehicles, to drive the vehicles, to understand our strategy, and really to help to dispel any myths, because again, there are a lot of common misperceptions out there around hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles specifically. I think, we do some messaging to do around battery electric vehicles, because it does seem like people think that we don't believe that that's part of it. But I think, again, we're huge proponents of electrification. We just want to make sure that we're making all of those options available. And so it's all about how do we educate people appropriately so that they can understand what our strategy is, and all of the research and development that has gone into making a vehicle that we're ready to launch, that's ready for production, right? Our customers would not accept a vehicle with a Toyota badge on it that didn't meet the durability that they're used to, right? That didn't perform the way that they're used to. So we need to launch vehicles only after we have tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of development hours put into that vehicle, and we have sufficient comfort that even though it's a brand new technology, it will still meet all of what our customers expect of the Toyota brand.
I guess the question then is, what is the reason we haven't gotten faster towards this new world of transportation? What are the barriers? Is it cost? Is it technology? Is it supply? Is it consumers' adoption? I mean, if you could just spell out to us why we're having such a hard time making this transition.
That's a really good question. I think for hydrogen, well, first of all, for any new technology, there is an inherent higher cost, right? That's just part of how new technologies work. So as we increase production volume, as we get more vehicles out there, that will drive down the cost of our vehicle. I'll give you an example from our prototype vehicle to the first generation Mirai that we were able to launch. We were able to decrease costs by about 95% between the prototype and the first gen. And the reason we were able to do that is we developed what's called a boost converter that effectively all it did was mated the voltage output of the fuel cell system to the voltage of our hybrid synergy drive system. Now, our hybrid synergy drive, I hope you're familiar with that term, but that's what's used in our hybrid vehicle lineup, which we build millions of every year. So now we have access to all these off-the-shelf production parts, right, which bring down the overall cost of the vehicle. And as you can imagine, back when we first launched the Prius, those production parts were still pretty expensive. But now we make so many of them that we've been able to significantly reduce the cost. So from just that prototype to the first gen, 95% cost reduction because of being able to use prototype parts. And so we kind of see that same trajectory for battery electrics and for fuel cell electrics as we, get to higher production volumes. Specifically, what I think has been hindering hydrogen and fuel cells is a few different factors. I think one is education. I think a common misconception about hydrogen is its safety. The only real experience a lot of people have with hydrogen is things like the Hindenburg, which isn't necessarily a good historical lesson in how to properly handle hydrogen. Luckily, as you mentioned earlier, we have decades of safe handling procedures with hydrogen. We have applicable codes, standards, and regulations in place to ensure that the systems we build meet the regulations that are required to ensure that we're safely handling the fuel. We wouldn't have launched the Mirai if we weren't 100% sure that this vehicle was as safe, if not safer, than a gasoline vehicle, right? So as far as safety goes, that's a non-issue. That is our highest priority at Toyota. We wouldn't have launched a vehicle if we didn't have sufficient, comfort with that level of safety. And then I think beyond that, it's that there's this almost, I don't want to say battle, but some type of a strange argument between battery electric and fuel cell electric of which is going to be the zero emission technology to move forward with. Where we think that that's the wrong argument. The argument needs to be, how do battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles work together against fossil fuels to displace our use of fossil fuels and therefore carbon emissions. So it seems that there is some rhetoric on one side that's kind of trying to indicate that hydrogen may be less clean or less efficient, or again, these kind of common misperceptions around hydrogen and fuel cell technology. Also that it's a fuel of the future. Again, I totally understand that people, where people are in other parts of the United States, they don't get to see it daily. They don't get to drive the Mirai daily, or see the Honda or Hyundai vehicles that are also on the road here in California, or go to a hydrogen fueling station. It's a very obscure concept until you could actually see it working in real time. So again, the misperception that hydrogen is a fuel or a technology of the future, when in fact it's here now. And what we need to get it, proliferated in a larger sense is to build more hydrogen dispensers, more stations, hydrogen refueling stations. And so here in California, the way that looks is you'll have a traditional gasoline station, and then, anywhere from 1 to 4 of those pumps have now been replaced with hydrogen dispensers. And so you get hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, rolling in and filling up one after another, serving hundreds of fuel cell electric vehicles a day, right? And so it is a real thing, but in order to get those stations and those dispensers in the ground, that requires support from the government. And so luckily here in California, we have support from the Air Resources Board, from the California Energy Commission, where they set aside money to help to incentivize new players to come in to put in these stations. And then also obviously to support through making sure that we're clear of any regulatory hurdles and the codes and standards are supportive of that infrastructure.
So NEWIEE is energy and environment, and you're on the transportation side. Maybe you can shed some light on this, because we see very few women in energy environment. I don't know if it's the same for you on the transportation, but this is a two-part question. How come the two, we worked very hard at NEWIEE to get energy and environment together, because the energy was siloed from the environment and they weren't cross-talking and references and stuff. So we worked very hard to get those groups to start being, working with each other. But it seems like transportation is in its own little silo, and it just doesn't seem to, how do we get them to work with the energy? Because that is critical. Especially towards the decarbonization. And do you have the same issues that we had, which is why we started NEWIEE 13 years ago? The number of women involved in this space is very small. And are you in transportation doing anything, and what to increase those numbers if that's the case?
Maybe I'll answer the second part first, which is yes, absolutely. There are not enough women. There's 50% of us, at least in the world, and that is not reflected at all. I've actually joked with one of the only other automotive journalists I've met who's a woman that, when we go to auto shows, it's the only time where roles are kind of reversed and we can go right into the women's restroom where the men are waiting in line for the restroom because there's so few of us there. And it's still pretty common for me to be the only woman in a meeting. That said, I think exactly, what you're doing, at NEWIEE to put together this a a space for women to get together and network with one another and really lift each other up and, be supported. That's exactly what we need in the industry. It's really easy to feel other than, and to feel kind of, just different, which is, it's just a hard space to operate in, right? So at Toyota, we have a group within research and development called Women Influencing and Impacting Toyota, which is a business partnering group that brings together women from all over Toyota North America in research and development and outside of research and development now as well. But obviously I'm a part of the R&D side. But that's exactly what we do. We offer a space for us to talk to one another about mentorship opportunities, about experiences we've had, things we've learned, just to help really, what we call scaffolding, building each other up, and making sure that we're inviting opportunities for the women that are coming in the door behind us to bring them up with us. And I think things like this, being able to talk to people and show them that there are women in the industry out there is really important. I remember when I was newly in this industry, there was actually an engineer, her name was Britta Gross at General Motors. And I used to, anytime she was talking anywhere, I would go and sign up just to listen to her speak. She was, I don't think she ever knew she was like this mentor for me, but she was like this, just a huge role model for me to look up to. And I think that's really important. I think when women see other women doing a job they want to do or in an industry they want to be a part of, it's really inspirational. So I really love that you do this, Ask Me Anything and introduce younger women to women in the industry, because it's really important work. Directly for me, I also reach out to organizations like the Society of Women Engineers. Work closely with them, with our recruiting department. We make sure that we are looking at good candidates from all different backgrounds, right? And that we're stepping out of our immediate network, right? There's this kind of silo that you can get stuck into when you don't really expand your searches beyond your just immediate network. So we make sure that when we pull people in, particularly through our co-op program, which is like our internship program, that we're looking at a really diverse set of candidates so that we can pull the best person regardless of their background. So there's a lot that can be done, and I think you're really familiar with that. So and then the first part, I was tangent there and forgot what the first part was.
I think you answered it because you said there's not, like what we experience, there's not that many women, and it's wonderful what they're trying to do at Toyota to increase the number of women. I guess we have another question coming in about hydrogen. A lot of municipalities depend on heavy vehicles to run, and we have a mandate here in Massachusetts and New England. Several of the New England states have adopted to reduce our carbon footprint, but the municipalities are in a catch-22. They have these heavy-duty vehicles, snow plows, pickup trucks, dumpsters, and everything, street sweepers, all on diesel. Do you see a future where these will go onto fuel cell and actually replace these dirty vehicles, because they feel terrible driving them around, and yet they're advocating for a reduction in carbon?
Absolutely. And again, this is where, I can't say 100% whether I see them go to hydrogen and fuel cell or battery electric, but the story is they will go all electric, right? And it really comes down to the fleet user, what their application is, what they're looking for, if they're going to go battery electric or fuel cell electric. And I'll give you an example of what we're seeing here, again, in California. If there's a fleet of, let's say, greater than 100 vehicles, and they need to, they work their shift, they come back, they need to quickly refill and then go off for the rest of their shift or something like that, just where logistically that's the way it works. It makes more sense for hydrogen and fuel cell electric, because you can have that one hydrogen station, you can bring them in, you can quickly refill them. For example, our Class 8 trucks take 15 minutes to refill versus what would take hours with a battery electric. So depending on the fleet's application, they can either quickly refill or they can manage their logistics so they can bring them in and recharge the trucks. But either way, I do see a future where all of these are powered 100% by battery or fuel cell electric vehicles.
So I guess the question comes back to just explore, because I always like to balance between professional and being women in leadership. It was interesting. You mentioned a mentor that you followed around. If you're a young woman, you really want to get into this space. What advice can you give them as to how they, because they're not in Detroit, they're not out in California, they're here in New England. We're not really big on cars. This has never been our area. You know, we don't have Teslas around here. We don't have Toyota. I mean, like, if I had an interest, can I do it, make a difference here in New England regarding transportation?
No, but transportation is so huge. You don't have to be, you know, working for an automotive company specifically. I mean, it touches so many facets of society. I mean, if you look at our direct and indirect team members who Toyota actually touches as far as jobs in the US, there's about 430,000 of us. And, you know, not all of those work directly for Toyota by any means, right? So there's so many different spaces you can get into transportation. And now, to your point earlier, there's this new intersection of transportation and energy that we're seeing, where people that want to, you know, move the grid to renewables, that want to decarbonize the grid, or utilities that are also want to decarbonize the gas, right? We move 85% of our energy right now is moved by molecules, not by electrons worldwide. So if we talk about decarbonization, we need to talk about how to decarbonize both the electrons and the molecules. And as people are looking for these ways to do that, they're saying, oh, there's this great tie-in with transportation, right? For battery electric, it's vehicle to grid. How do we recharge the vehicles at a time that takes advantage of renewable electricity generation? For hydrogen, we can generate the hydrogen off of renewables and use it to store the energy for use later, either back to the grid or to the vehicles, right? So we're in this new space where we can do, you know, the decarbonization of both the energy sector and the transportation in a really smart way. That's going to make the entire system more resilient and more sustainable. So I don't want someone that wants to be in transportation to just think about working on the cars, right? There's so many other facets of transportation that we need to address, and that involve the energy side of things, that involve mobility as a service. There's, you know, smart ways of you know, like the Ubers and Lyfts that have really rocked the world, like car sharing, right? There's all these other, you know, great technologies that are coming available that will help us to decarbonize. So I would say, even though there isn't like a automotive headquarters in Massachusetts per se, there is still a ton of opportunity of things to step into there. A lot of startups. I mean, gosh, you guys have some phenomenal universities doing great work out there. You know, even government looking at policy work, which has a huge influence on decarbonizing transportation and energy. So, you know, for anyone looking to get into this field, my recommendation is internships. I delayed my graduation by almost a year because I had 2.5 years of internships under my belt before I graduated with my bachelor's. So when you offer to step into a company, you know, either for free or for a lower wage, you're gonna get some bites, right? And you'll get a fantastic opportunity to try your foot in a space and see if that's really, you know, where your purpose is, if that aligns with what you want your career to be. It's a really rare moment, I think, in university to be able to try different jobs in different parts of this massive industry and find really what the right fit is for you. Because, you know, once you graduate, it doesn't look good on your resume if you're hopping companies every year, right? So take advantage of the time, and, you know, in university, in your master's, wherever it is, to intern and figure out what part of that transportation and energy space you want to play a role in.
Well, Jackie, we just got a question, and it brings me back to the whole chicken and egg thing. So we first heard about electric cars, and then, but there wasn't enough powering stations for the electric cars. So which came first? So we just got a question. Are we going down the same road with hydrogen? And is Toyota going to work to get these stations, get these hydrogen pumps in? And why? You know, what, and if you are, how are you going to do that? And it's just that we're running out of time. So how quickly can we get these put into the stations? Are you going to get behind that so we don't have this chicken and egg where we have cars, but we don't have stations, but we have stations, we don't have cars. Can somebody kind of make it so that we have what we need to just do the transition?
Yeah, it's not a question of chicken or egg anymore. It's very clear. We need the stations first. Without the stations, we can't launch the vehicles. What we're seeing here in California is we don't have enough filling stations to support our California customers. There are lines at the stations. We're running out of fuel at the stations. It's an unfortunate situation that our Mirai, what we call trailblazers, our early owners, are going on this journey with us, but they're sending a very clear signal that, you know, we have this vehicle that I drive, that they drive, that we love to drive, that fully replaces our conventional vehicle, right? But we just don't have enough places to fill them. Why is that? California has made $400 million available to zero emission infrastructure. Only 40 million of that went to hydrogen. That's 10%. The rest of it went to battery electrics, went to charging infrastructure. So there's a huge gap in the parity of incentives and financing going into hydrogen infrastructure versus what is going into battery electric, into charging infrastructure. So that is a gap that we need to close. So we see similar, discussions, conversations happening elsewhere in states when people talk about zero emission vehicles, when they talk about electrification, they forget about hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles, or they don't include it in the conversation. And so what we're doing is educating legislators, public, whomever we can, that when we talk electric vehicles, when we talk electrification, that we mean plug-in hybrids, battery electrics, fuel cell electrics, and that they are all required to get our customers into lower emission or zero emission vehicles. So that is really what we're doing. We have, in certain cases, had made collaborations directly with station providers. There's a few examples of that in California where we've directly influenced or had a partnership or collaboration with companies building out stations. For example, here in California, First Element. In the Northeast, we worked with a company called Air Liquide to build out stations there, which have unfortunately been remained dormant while we wait for regulations in the state to change to allow us to launch our vehicles there. But related to that, we are working again directly with the legislators in, Massachusetts, for example, to try to amend those regulations to make it so we can launch the vehicles. So this is really, the answer is yes, we are doing as much as we can to try to build up the supporting infrastructure, but the infrastructure needs to come first, because it's not fair. It's not fair to launch a vehicle and then not have our customers to actually use the vehicle, right? That doesn't make sense.
Well, you mentioned regulation, and you have on the call today a lot of influential women that are leaders in our industry, and they work directly with these regulators and these policymakers. So what is that regulation that's holding you guys up moving forward? Can you give us some information or background or have us understand, educate us right now as to what they see as the regulatory roadblock that they're putting in place?
Yes, so in Massachusetts specifically, it's an old regulation that was meant to prevent hydrogen vehicles or hydrogen to be transported through tunnels or over bridges. And at the time when it was written, it made a lot of sense because, it's their job to protect public health. And at the time, these hydrogens, cylinders would be driven in the back of pickup trucks or something. Think for like welding applications for industrial gas applications, right? When the regulators first wrote this law, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles didn't exist, or they never were considered to be part of a powertrain. Now the hydrogen tanks are part of our powertrain, right? They're part of the vehicle that's crash tested. They're part of like all these stringent regulations that are in place globally to ensure that the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are safe. But when these regulations were written, that wasn't the case. Those didn't even exist. So unfortunately, the law still says that hydrogen cannot be driven through tunnels or over bridges, which is a problem, especially for people that live in Boston. I don't know about you, but pretty much every time I fly into Boston, even if I try to avoid a tunnel, I end up getting lost and going through a tunnel. So that's the language that needs to change. And they did actually have some proposed language on the table earlier. Again, we're working closely with them. We hope to have that law change soon, but that's been the main prohibitor of us being able to officially launch in the state of Massachusetts.
Well, this has really been important because you talk about education, and I'm glad you joined us today. And I want to make a personal plea to all my fellow NEWIEE women out there that this is ridiculous. I mean, we have an opportunity to get a clean energy fuel and have choice, which is what we've been talking about all along, and have something that can really reduce some of the heavy polluters, such as the heavy duty vehicles, the light duty vehicles. And I assume it applies to trains and marine business because we're trying to also build out an offshore wind industry. So if we can't use these fuel cells for trains and marines and heavy and light duty vehicles, we're missing a great opportunity. Could you talk a little bit more about the airlines, because we have Logan Airport, which is a major polluter, and I understand that the airline, the airspace only can basically, what is the solution? And every time I talk about it, people say the only solution is hydrogen and fuel cells. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because they're huge. Everyone's starting to travel again. Labor Day, we had at the back to 2019 travels. And one of those planes must be giving off about hundreds of cars worth of carbon.
Oh man, yeah, Mary, you touched on I used to I was directly involved with the Society of Automotive Engineers making the initial standards for hydrogen. One, for example, was how the hydrogen, when you go to a hydrogen dispenser anywhere in the world, all of the nozzles fit all the receptacles on all the vehicles. So if, you buy a vehicle in Japan and bring it to the US and you connect it here in California, it'll work anywhere worldwide. This is because of a standard that we used to, that we made together as an industry. I sat there, with Honda, Hyundai, Ford, General Motors, Daimler, arguing about what this interface looked like so that it would be standardized, because we saw that this was part of like the common good. This is part of our goal towards building a hydrogen infrastructure. So unlike chargers, all hydrogen stations are compatible. That said, a lot of us would fly from Los Angeles to Detroit to make these standards. And one time, I got on the plane and I saw like 5 of my other colleagues from different research and development centers around Los Angeles. And we went and sat together and they're like, you do realize that just from taking this one flight, we are undoing all of the good that we've been working for this entire year. And it was just like, cool. Thanks for that reminder, that depressing reminder. I really appreciate that. So then we started to do more virtual meetings, which was nice. But yes, aviation is huge. I think what we're seeing now is the same kind of demonstrations that were, the same things we're showing right now at the port, at the marine port, right? We're moving the Class 8 trucks, or moving what's called the utility tractor rigs, which are cargo handling equipment. So you can imagine at the airports, airport ground support equipment, all of that equipment that's running around, moving the planes, moving the luggage. Those are all pretty easy to switch over to hydrogen and fuel cells. And the beauty is, if you have a hydrogen station there, it's a large fleet. We can quickly refill all those with hydrogen. We can transfer all those from diesel and gasoline to hydrogen. So that is a more immediate, space where hydrogen and fuel cell can start to decarbonize airports. When it comes to replacing jet fuel, that is tricky because jet fuel is spectacular as far as volumetric and gravimetric energy density. What we are seeing is smaller planes that are moving to hydrogen and fuel cells. And we're also seeing the hydrogen fuel cells being used as auxiliary power units in planes. There is certainly a space for us to move towards more decarbonization of aviation in the future, but again, it's going to take us some time to get there. Jet fuel is really a phenomenal fuel. The amount of energy that and power that's required on planes is really spectacular. So it's a great engineering challenge, and I offer, if there's any women who are new in their careers at all on this call, please pick that up, because I'm going to focus on the cars and the ground equipment. Somebody take on the stuff in the air, and let's get there.
This is great because I think we've given a lot of food for thought on this. And I'm glad you straightened out the issue about us, the electric, the fuel cells, the hydrogen, how that is all for clean transportation. it's unfortunate that hydrogen has been lost since it's been such an incredible fuel. Is there any downsides, anything that we need to know? Because we're going to be big champions now for hydrogen. I just can feel it based on this call. Is there anything we need to know that still needs to be worked out? And one of the things I heard is cost. So you have to create hydrogen. So I heard the moonshot thing. Can you give us a little bit more insight on that? And would our offshore wind industry play a role in maybe reducing that or meeting the moonshot goal? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the cost of the fuel itself is actually pretty interesting. Hydrogen, again, is already an industrial commodity here in the US. We make 10 million metric tons of it annually. Most of that goes to petrochemical industry, to refining crude oil into gasoline. So there's a lot of hydrogen in Texas. Where does that come from? It comes from steam methane reformation of natural gas. So of course, with that natural gas, you have a CO2 offset. That is less than what we would, than what it would be if we're actually just using that natural gas and burning it, right? Or if we're using oil, just petroleum. So it is better, but our goal is better than, but our goal is 100% renewable, 100% sustainable, right? So right now in California, 33% of the hydrogen that goes into our light duty fleet must be renewable. Some of our stations are already doing 100% renewable. Depends on where you get the hydrogen. And that's one of the beautiful things about hydrogen, not just this energy density, but also that it is so abundant that you can make hydrogen from whatever your local resource is, right? And it really makes for fantastic domestic energy security, right? We can make enough of it here. And right now the hydrogen we make is at about $1 a kilogram if you look at traditional fuel. So that means for my Mirai, it would be like less than $6 to fill it up on a full tank. That's not the case of what I'm actually seeing at the station. At the station, you can get charged, I think you can look it up online right now, but somewhere around like $15 a kilogram. So it's some kind of arbitrary, huge increase in the cost of the fuel that's meant to recover that expensive cost of the initial infrastructure. So they're building these stations and they're trying to kind of, recover the cost, which makes sense. But if we look at making hydrogen from renewables, which can be, to your point, from wind, can be from solar, can be from biomethane, all these sources kind of kick up the cost of hydrogen again because it's a new technology. The Department of Energy just released their what's called an Earth shot, which is a play off of the moon shot. And the target is to, within a decade, reduce the cost of renewable hydrogen to $1 a kilogram. And they think that this is something that's very achievable because, again, we have the technology. It's just about scaling it up, kind of similarly to how it was done with photovoltaics. So if you look at the Department of Energy, the role they played with getting solar to be such a predominant and cheap source of energy or of electricity here, in the US, they see a similar trajectory for renewable hydrogen. And of course, we're 100% on board because that falls in perfectly with our sustainable strategy, right, to move towards this green hydrogen. And I think what we're starting to see now is, again, coming back to that intersection of energy and transportation. Utilities are starting to see hydrogen as a phenomenal energy storage mechanism for these renewables. And so they're starting to say, okay, well, it's cheaper and the longevity of storing that energy is easier when we use hydrogen versus when we use large scale battery installations to capture the renewables, to levelize the grid. Well, now we have all this excess hydrogen available. What do we do with it? Do we use it to in turn create electricity and send it back to the grid? Or can we also use it in our fleets? Can we sell it to the airports to support their ground equipment? So there are all these great applications where, again, we can build things smarter than we have previously and make sure that there's a better integration between the energy system and the transportation system, such that hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, is significantly cheaper.
So we have a question, again, people are focusing on that stations. So will these stations be PEM supplied or will they be tube trailer? I mean, so how will you see the stations themselves be fueled?
That's an educated question. I like whoever asked that question. That's a great question. So what we're seeing here in larger urban areas is trailer delivered, either gaseous or liquid. Right now we've moved even towards liquid delivered already because we're You know, we have stations that are doing over 1,000 kilograms of hydrogen a day. Reason being footprint. So in urban areas, again, we're co-locating these dispensers with gasoline dispensers. We just don't have the space to do on-site hydrogen generation. You know, these are customers in LA where there's a ton of them and very little space. And so we're just pumping through a lot of vehicles, right? If you look at rural areas, then absolutely do on-site generation. You can do it again through biomethane. Let's say you're a farm in the middle of nowhere, you have a lot of methane. Take that, make hydrogen, fill your fleet. You can do a PEM electrolytic or high temperature electrolytic hydrogen. So there's, you know, again, hydrogen is an abundant local renewable resource. Use whatever you have available and make it.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but we are getting towards the end of our hour, and I have one last question for you. And that is, what if you had to think back of somebody who gave you a piece of advice, and think all the way back to the time you were at the General Motors or Pep Boys, if you could think of one piece of advice that someone gave you, what was it? And did you follow through it or not? I would be interested to hear.
Oh man, that's a really good question. It's probably one, I think the most influential one for me lately was, or, you know, that I can think of at this moment, actually came from Oprah Winfrey, not directly. I would love to have gotten this piece of advice from her directly, but I got it from a podcast. Do not know Oprah personally. But she was talking about really checking in with the intention of doing something. So before you agree to do something, before you agree to help a friend or a family member or go on a podcast or support an event or speak at a seminar or whatever, understand what your intention is. And when that intention aligns with your values, it really, it promotes the best quality of work that you can do. And so for me, you know, before I have a meeting, before I you know, give a presentation, before I even, you know, do something as simple as check a budget or whatever, I make sure that I take a few minutes just to understand what my intention is of doing that. And I think that when we are, you know, especially as women, when we are doing something that's valuable and has purpose and the intention really aligns with the greater good, right? We're going to bring our best selves and the best value to our work. So that would be my, yeah, the most useful piece of advice I've had lately is just to take the time to really understand what your intentions are for whatever it is you're about to do.
Well, Jackie, I want to thank you that your intentions to come on to Ask Me Anything was so wonderful, because I've learned so much, and we are 1 minute left, so I want to thank everybody who signed up to the webinar. I thank everybody who's going to be listening to the recording. I think you have a great future ahead of you. This is really exciting, and I can't wait till I get my hydrogen fuel cell car and be able to fill it up at the same time it takes me to fill up my gas SUV, and I can be providing a benefit back to the environment and not be a polluter. So I'm excited. I hope Toyota is successful. And please stay in touch with NEWIEE. We'd love to hear some more. Maybe we can check back in a year with you and see how things are going.
It would be fantastic. I'd love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone. And please, everyone, please tune in on October 13th to listen to Priscilla, who's going to talk to us about Vistra and the power generation market. I want to thank everyone who asked questions today. This was really wonderful. And as I keep on getting, everyone keeps on saying, Jackie, you're inspiring. And thank you again for being on our show. Okay, take care. See you in October. Thank you. Mary Yusevich, signing off.